He stands in the entryway like a verdict. Wind blows grit across the threshold and catches on the hard lines of a visor that does not blink. A quiet forest of antennae and armor plates settles into stillness. No flourish, no introduction. Only the gentle hum of hidden servos and the delicate rattle of weapons that have ended more arguments than words ever could. The cantina talk dies the way a campfire dies in rain. A shadow follows him in, and the shadow is older than the man. It is a rumor given bones. The galaxy knows names that echo like temple bells, and there are saints and monsters among them. This one is something stranger, a myth that collects debts, a mask that learned to be a face, a silence that learned to speak in the language of consequence. They call him Boba Fett. Before the armor, before the visor that makes cowards of the brave, there was a sea world where storms braided white scars across black water. Kamino stood far from memory and nearer to design, a cathedral of laboratories balanced above endless tide. Here, in tall light and measured steps, a people of precision took contracts like vows. They promised results and delivered armies. They tuned flesh the way musicians tune strings, adjusting growth, obedience, drive. The patron who came to them wore courtly cruelty the way others wore robes. He called himself a count. He promised credits and secrecy, and a place in history that no one would see until it was too late. From that bargain came a legion that looked like one man, and from that legion came one child who was not meant to be many. Jango Fett was the template, a hunter with a past reduced to whispers and a future contracted into armor. He wanted more than money from Kamino. He wanted legacy. Not merely a copy among copies, not a soldier programmed to age fast and die early, but a son. Unaltered, unhurried by the chemical clocks that would rush brothers from boyhood to battlefield. Unbent by behavioral tethers that would pull minds tight around obedience. The Kaminoans yielded. They grew a single life in the long shadow of an army. He would not be broken to a command chorus. He would not march to anyone's drum. He would learn at the hand of the man whose face the galaxy would soon learn to fear and then forget among millions. They named him Boba. The boy grew under constant rain and constant instruction. He learned to keep balance when platforms shuddered under thunder. He learned to read the small print of danger in any room. He learned that the line between pursuit and ambush is drawn with patience. Jango taught him on ranges where the air smelled of ozone and oil. He taught him in ships where the cold ache of space made every sound travel farther. He taught him with a measured affection that came wrapped in discipline and wrapped again in caution. There would be no life without danger. There would be no pride without mastery. There would be no future without understanding that reputation is a weapon you must oil like any other. Then the galaxy moved toward war as if drawn by a tide. The Count's plan flowered from secret to spectacle. Clones marched in crisp ranks, white armor like foam on the Camino Sea, and the Republic that had grown old without noticing found its veins suddenly full of young blood. It should have been a triumph to the architects of order. To Boba, it was a widening world of uniforms that wore his father's face and voices that sounded like home. In the dust of a red world lined with petrified stone, battle snapped shut like a trap. Jango fell to a purple blade and a single life ended, while millions wearing its likeness marched on. The boy watched a mask take his father's last breath away and knew in that moment what the rest of his life would be about. The line between justice and vengeance is easy to draw when you are young and your hands are empty. You call it purpose and sharpen it until it cuts anything it touches. Grief made him quick and lonely. He gathered mentors the way a storm gathers loose things. Some were patient and careful. Some were only cruel in a different key. He studied under hunters who could smell a lie, and under thieves who could count the seconds between patrols by listening to the weight of silence in a hallway. He learned to vanish in a crowd, and to move through a station without leaving a ghost of a footprint. He also learned what a child learns when surrounded by people who sell danger. that loyalty is a coin you spend once, and that mercy must be carried like contraband. The young Fett tried to carve a path toward the Jedi who had taken his father, and every step in that direction taught him a lesson, less about revenge and more about survival. Vengeance is a fire that consumes its own lantern. Survival is a map that unfolds into the rest of your life. On battlefields and in corridors full of politics, the boy became a problem that could not be ignored and a resource that could not be wasted. He infiltrated troop decks, where clones spoke calmly about regulations and joked about rations. He walked among rows of faces that mirrored a home he could not return to. He learned where command gathered, where anger slept, where transport routes braided and unbraided, how to place a trap not only where a man would step, but where his fear would step first. The galaxy taught him that if you cannot move a mountain, you can learn to move the path that leads others around it. He failed at revenge more than once, and every failure left a line of understanding on his spirit. The discipline his father pressed into him hardened into something that did not crack when fortune pushed against it. Armor came to him as inheritance and as language. The plates were not merely protection. They were sentences written in metal. The T-shaped visor was a deliberate myth, a refusal to let the eyes tell one story while the stance told another. It remembers a people who turned survival into ceremony and who understood that anonymity can be a sanctuary as well as a weapon. When Boba wore that visor, the room reflected in it and learned something about itself, how quickly it could become prey. The color that settled on his plates carried its own quiet history. Every scratch was a date you could not print. Every patch of glossy repainting told a story of renewal and intent. Mandalorian traditions haunted the armor, even when the man inside it lived at the edges of those traditions. Heritage can be a clan you return to or a weather pattern you learn to move within. For Boba, it was both. Weaponry circled him like a quiet constellation. The carbine that kicked with a familiar rhythm. The whipcord that moved almost faster than thought. Darts tucked into the seams of gauntlets. A flamethrower that walked a line between tool and terror. A jetpack with its own mind. A fussy ally that could lift you out of a grave or, in the wrong moment, shove you toward it. He treated each machine like a contract made in the present tense. Nothing would work forever without respect. Nothing would forgive carelessness. In that philosophy, he echoed real warrior castes from quiet history across 1,000 worlds. He understood what the samurai understood about elegance and lethality, wearing the same garment. He understood what old knights understood about heraldry that announces and helmets that disguise. He understood what frontier gunfighters understood about a silhouette that can do half the talking in a room. His ship was more than transport. It was a partner with a brooding voice and a distinct profile that could be recognized from the corner of the eye. It rotated like a predator fixing on a scent, landing on its back like a sleeping animal, and rising nose forward like a challenge. Its name changed in the way names sometimes change when cultures argue, but its purpose did not. It was a prison for those who thought they would travel freely, a cradle for a pilot who did not trust luck, a workshop where repairs and intentions were hammered into alignment. Sensor suites and tracking arrays gave Boba the same advantage hunters have always cultivated: the luxury of patience. Seismic charges, mines, and a quiet catalog of tricks meant that pursuit could become ambush at the twist of a throttle. The craft, like its owner, did not need to announce itself to be unforgettable. As the Republic cracked and the Empire slid into place, the market for men like Boba became a black star drawing contracts into its gravity. He took work that sent him across the old lanes of power. He learned the smell of imperial corridors and the sound of hut palaces when laughter turned to calculation. He stepped into rooms with people who framed their threats in velvet and people who framed their promises in slime. He walked out again, most of the time, with the kind of money you cannot spend in any one place, and with the kind of reputation that does the spending for you. The Empire called him when they wanted a problem solved, without the embarrassment of procedure. Crime lords called him when they wanted a message written in a language that fear understands instantly. A meeting on a star dreadnought gave the galaxy one of its tidiest pictures of Boba Fett. A line of hunters stood like a museum of methods, each with a signature stance, each dangerous, each performing the rituals of menace. Boba did not perform. He did not threaten. He merely existed the way a cliff exists above a storm sea. The Lord in Black warned him not to disintegrate the quarry, which is the sort of instruction you do not give a man unless you know what he can do and have hired him for precisely that. Across the room, the mask with the T-shaped gaze betrayed nothing. Masks are merciful to the wearer. They give away only what you decide to show. Boba showed readiness and nothing else. Tracking a freighter led him to a city hung above clouds, where wealth tried to pretend that gravity was a rumor. He recognized the rhythm of a fleeing captain and predicted the step where daring would turn into improvised hope. He waited where the trail would end. He watched as allies became hostages and as choices narrowed into a single corridor. The target was prepared like cargo and sealed in a golden stone of science and cruelty. A prize that did not struggle, a legend reduced to delivery. A payment awaited on a desert world where palaces looked like dunes that learned ambition. In the palace of a hut, Boba occupied the curious space reserved for sharks in rich men's aquariums. He did not belong, and yet he was part of the tableau. Musicians tuned for cruelty. Guards practiced boredom. The court's laughter broke like glass. The hunter stood in armor that was not fancy enough to be decoration and not dull enough to be furniture. He was an edge placed near a throne to remind guests that even indulgence has teeth. If he spoke little, it was because power dialogues do not require many lines, only timing. He had delivered a man whose name sang across the rebellion like a drumbeat. He had delivered him to a creature that would treat him as ornament and ransom for reputation. The galaxy would remember that image longer than most governments last. Perhaps every legend needs a fall that can be told around campfires. On a sail barge above a mouth in the earth, triumph and farce collided. A shout, a swing, a spark on a jetpack that had seen too much improvisation, and the hunter tumbled into a pit whose reputation was older than his armor. The Sarlacc is a scripture that nature wrote about slow hunger. Its patience is a theology. Its acid is doctrine. To fall into it is to find time given new meaning, to discover that pain can learn to count. In that darkness, flesh dissolves and hope thins into a thread. The visor that had refused 1,000 interrogations now reflected only digestive gloom. If the galaxy were a tidy storyteller, the legend would end there. But legends belong to those who refuse to be written by other mouths. In the antechambers of canon, the story of escape is a struggle measured in breaths and will. The armor buys seconds against a creature that eats eras. Instruments fail, weapons cough and then fall silent. Air is a currency that vanishes in fistfuls. A stray soldier fallen from another battle provides a brief kindness of oxygen. The flamethrower hisses symbols onto the darkness and turns part of that living prison into retreat. Hands that have learned to pick locks find purchase in flesh that does not allow purchase. He claws upward through a world that collapses back upon itself. The sand above receives him like an old debt come due. He does not rise as a victor. He rises as a survivor who knows what victory costs. In the halls of older tales that now fly under the flag of legend, the escape is told with different torches. Rescue arrives in the form of another hunter with his own scars and quiet code. The survivor is a ruin of a man, starved and burned and still stubborn enough to bargain with death. He is rebuilt the way cities are rebuilt after sieges, scaffolding first, then walls, then the slow return of electricity. Stories multiply about the years that follow, about armor recovered, about a title among a shattered people, about a man who learns to lead as well as to stalk. These are powerful tales even when they are not the official ones, because they reveal the long fascination the galaxy has with a mask that refuses to be discarded. On the sands that tried to claim him, the survivor met a people who had made the desert their teacher. The tribe that adopted him had its own code, stern and exacting, born from a land that punishes softness. He learned to earn water rather than drink it. He learned to listen to wind the way a navigator listens to instruments. He learned to fight with a weapon carved from bone and memory. In the rhythm of shared labor and shared danger, the man who had been built around solitary contracts discovered a different kind of armor. Respect given and returned. Ceremony that is not performance but acknowledgement. Grief common and therefore lighter. The mask in those days was often the sky. The visor was the stare of a horizon that keeps its secrets. He emerged from that adoption not as a different person, but as a person with a different math for calculating worth. The armor returned to him by circuitous roads, passing through the hands of others who wore it as costume and as claim. When he took it back, the plates were repainted as if to say that the man inside had made repairs as well. The dings were not erased so much as contextualized. He was no longer a blur at the edge of someone else's story. He stepped forward in full light, shoulders square beside allies of convenience and honor. In battles over a child who had become the heart of a new myth, he proved that skill does not rust, and that debt repaid with integrity can taste sweeter than any fee. His ship's shockwaves sang across the void and reminded predators that there are old songs not yet forgotten. From there, the calculus changed. The hunter, who had always been a conversation you did not want to have between crimes, decided to try a different sentence entirely. He reached for rule. Not the rule of spectacle, not the rule of iron daily rehearsals, but the quieter rule of corridors and schedules and meetings in low rooms where hard decisions are poured like bitter tea. To stand in the vacuum left by a hut is to invite the attention of every syndicate, every greedy municipal officer, every ambitious street crew that estimates your chances and bets against you. He and a partner with a spine of glass and steel walked the old steps of authority in a city that regards authority as a suggestion. He tried to trade fear for respect and discovered that respect cannot be bought at once. It must be paid for in patience and blood, and the nerve to survive the day after a compromise. The new daimyo rode a beast that legends had held for schoolyard boasts and bedtime warnings. He faced armored nightmares that crawled out of another era and another siege. He attempted diplomacy where assassination had been standard. He listened in the way many rulers forget to listen. Not every move was clean. Not every victory glowed. But in the friction between who he had been and who he was trying to be, the story found a different music. The mask did not disappear. It learned to share the stage with a face that had finally earned the right to be seen without it. To understand his myth, it helps to thread him through older archetypes that humanity keeps in a drawer for when new stories need old skeletons. He is the Ronin, masterless, not because he cannot serve, but because the world that should have been worth serving betrayed its own oaths. He is the gunslinger whose reputation steps through the saloon doors before he does, compelled not by bloodlust, but by the arithmetic of survival and pride. He is the outlaw king who claims a corner of a wasteland and attempts to make it more than a throne of skulls. He is a pilgrim of violence, learning late that community is a shield you cannot wear, but that can still turn aside arrows. Place him among the factions of the wider saga, and his silhouette becomes clearer. The Jedi are light-trained into a style. The Sith are desire-disciplined until it becomes conquest. Smugglers make jokes to keep doom at a distance. Mandalorians wear history so densely that even their quiet moments sound like drumbeats. Boba Fett moves between them like a needle, stitching scenes together with thread that does not call attention to itself until the garment is complete. He is not on a crusade. He is not a prophet. He is not a comedian. He is a professional, which in this universe is a vocation that deserves its own cathedral. Symbols matter. The visor is a promise of impartiality. It does not widen or narrow with surprise or contempt. It does not telegraph pity. The crest on a pauldron remembers beasts that once roared across the plains of a world, now scattered across folk songs and metallurgical practice. The jetpack reminds us that verticality is a kind of freedom denied to those trapped on the ground, and that freedom can misbehave just when you need it most. The gauntlets tell the truth that a handshake can conceal a trap, and that sometimes the only safeguard against treachery is to be better at it than the other man. The cape, when he wears one, is not a banner so much as a piece of weather he has chosen to carry. The overall impression is that of a shrine built for one. You do not enter lightly. You do not leave the same. Consider the economies that produced and then relied on his talent. War is a factory that keeps building even when you pull the plug, because the machines it set in motion become habits. After the Republic fell into its own shadow, contracts replaced ideologies for many who had once marched under flags. A man who knows how to hunt valuable quarry can live anywhere. A man who does it with restraint can live long. The Empire knew his usefulness. Criminal clans knew his usefulness. Rebel cells knew to avoid being anywhere near that usefulness. His name passed down corridors ahead of him like a weather report. People made different choices when they heard it. That is the purest definition of power. Fear is a multiplier, but so is reputation. Stories exaggerate because they are afraid to be ordinary. Boba benefited from that math. Some tales of his exploits grew in the telling until he became less a man and more a looming etiquette. Do not betray. Do not run if you have been paid to stand. Do not believe a closed door will save you. And yet, the true measure of his threat was quieter. When he spoke, he wasted very little air. When he moved, he traveled exactly as far as he needed to. When he fought, he conserved effort as if it were a rare fuel. Even his silence was curated. Others filled it with apologies or bluff, and both were useful. His brushes with the Jedi set him on a course that could have calcified into obsession. The boy hungered for the head of a man whose blade had shattered his family. The young hunter aimed shadowed plans at a general whose calm was famous. But hunting an ideal is like sniping fog. Over time, the commitments of daily survival sanded down the sharpest edges of revenge, and the man who remained discovered that dignity can outlast fury. This does not mean the old fires went out. It means they were folded into a hearth that warmed a larger room. When the galaxy learned that the mask had not been digested by the desert, reactions spiraled outward like the wake of a stone thrown into still water. Allies of chance rethought bargains. Enemies recalculated. Outlaws looked up from cards. Lawmen confirmed that their warrants were up to date. The new phase of his life that followed was almost monastic in its focus. Armor tended, code renewed, instruments calibrated. A new discipline set upon an old foundation. In the company of an assassin, with debts of her own and honor wrapped in pragmatism, he began to build something that looked suspiciously like a home base. Governing is a craft far from the skills that teach you how to drop through a skylight without breaking your ankle. It requires patience measured in different units. It demands that you declare who is under your protection, and then make that declaration true, even when luck and strength are having an argument about you. The daimyo's court held a bestiary of personalities. Municipal officials, fluent in flattery, street racers who believed speed was its own argument, old warriors whose loyalty had begun as employment and deepened into something with better posture. To that mix came relics of old wars, new threats in old shapes, and the constant negotiation with a city that does not really want to be tamed. The man who had perfected the art of leaving with what he came for now had to master the art of staying until the work was done. It is worth pausing to consider how the wider culture seized upon him long before any of this was written in full. He appeared briefly and left fingerprints that outlasted others who had paragraphs. The clean geometry of his armor, the economy of his presence, the promise of lethal competence, all these combined into a character who could be projected upon by imaginations hungry for elegant danger. In quiet corners of the real world, children and collectors waited for figures that promised spring-loaded wonders. Early cartoons whispered his name in a style that blended myth with mischief. Expanded tales rushed to fill the spaces between a few on-screen gestures and an entire life. The result was a peculiar kind of fame. The character as canvas, the canvas as mirror. Legend stories explored paths where he became a war leader among a diaspora of warriors, where the old armor served not only as uniform, but as flag. In those pages he trained scions of powerful families, brokered uneasy peace among clans, aged into a grimmer wisdom that still made room for sharp humor. Canon charts a different, leaner path, one that treasures the weight of a single life made stubborn by survival. The two sets of stories disagree in details and agree in essence. They present a man who refuses erasure, a mask that found a face to deserve it, and a myth that learned to do more than haunt bounty postings. When you speak of the technology that clothed him, you also speak of philosophy. Mandalorian armor was never only metal. It was a portable ancestry, a choice to carry your people around the stars. The visor that draws a straight line down through a narrow field of view insists on decision. You see less, but you see what matters. The plates declare that vulnerability is something you manage, not something you accept as a sentence. The weapons mounted on wrists and shoulders argue that advantages should be near at hand and redundant. And the jetpack, that unruly catechism of altitude, is the confession that to survive, you must sometimes depart the plane on which your enemies live and think. These are not gadgets. They are a worldview strapped on one piece at a time. Look again at the ship. It taught him patience in long orbits above worlds that did not yet know they would be visited. It taught him attention as he tuned out the chatter of space and listened for the music of a single transponder. It taught him humility, the way any machine teaches a professional, by punishing arrogance with breakdowns that arrive at the worst possible moment. He modified it with the frank intimacy of a craftsman. Compartments for trophies, racks for prisoners, stealth baffles to confuse scanners, engineered echoes that turned a simple bomb into a percussion instrument heard across kilometers. He was as much a pilot as he was a marksman, and he loved the geometry of dogfights, where timing and angle are monarch and queen. Within crime syndicates his name carried a surcharge. You hired him when you needed an outcome, not an attempt. Hut Space murmured its own commentary on his visits. The protection rackets ran quieter. The assassins halted gossip and rehearsed instead. The bookkeepers updated ledgers with a private thrill, because certainty is rare in their line of work, and he represented certainty. In the imperial apparatus, mid-level officers learned to keep their reports short when his file crossed their inbox. He placed missing rebels where the Empire wanted them. He placed threats to the Empire where the underworld wanted them. He operated in that slim, profitable overlap where principle pretends to sleep while greed and necessity shake hands. None of this erases the child who stood in rain and watched a parent vanish behind a mask not his own. On the contrary, the entire arc reads like a long answer to that moment. The skill with weapons, the excellence at tracking, the hunger for a reputation that keeps you alive before you even draw, all of it is the architecture built over a wound. He never becomes sentimental about it. He weaponizes it. He learns that control is the antidote to chaos, and that professionalism is a spell you cast on a world that would rather be random. In the end, the shot that knocks his jetpack into folly is exactly the sort of comedy that life loves to unleash on men who have prepared for everything. His return from the mouth that digests ages is exactly the sort of counterpunch that men like him learn to throw against fate. In considering the Sarlacc, we cannot ignore the symbolism that storytellers cherish. It is oblivion made organic, a justice system that eats all appeals, a god of patience whose prayers are muffled screams. To escape it is not to defy gravity, though gravity is involved. It is to defy the consensus of the living about what is possible. That defiance becomes a sacrament for the man who performs it. He understands future threats differently afterward. He understands the value of tribes who do not demand that he become less to belong. He understands that a throne means nothing without a street that looks up at it and does not spit. When he sits in a chair that once supported the worst indulgences of power, he tries to subtract the indulgence and leave the power. That is a delicate math. He fails and tries again. He applies the discipline of scheduled payments to the chaos of fiefdoms. He appoints allies and prunes them. He permits spectacle when plain force would have been simpler, because he has learned that respect is not merely fear with better manners. It is the glad admission of dependence. If his experiment in civility under fire has uneven results, it feels honest to the life that shaped him. He is still a hunter. He has simply chosen to hunt different prey: instability, betrayal, the kind of poverty that breeds counterfeit power. Set him beside other Mandalorians, and the contrasts shine. Some inhabit creed the way monks inhabit cloisters, never unmasking, never compromising. Their identity a vow made new each morning. Some wear the plates with ironic distance, a fashion choice underwritten by stolen valor. Some led armies. Some raise foundlings. Boba stands apart as a man who treated the creed like weather, always there, sometimes shelter, sometimes storm, never entirely ignorable. He inherits a chain code that tells a story of a father who was himself an adoption of war. He honors that code in his way. He keeps what is useful from tradition and sets the rest down with a nod of respect. There is wisdom in that pragmatism, and there is also loneliness. The Jedi would read him as a lesson in attachment, carved by loss into strict competence. The Sith might admire his refusal to bow and misunderstand his refusal to kneel as ambition rather than as boundary. Smugglers swap legends about him in docking bays and then lower their voices, because to speak too loudly is to invite his attention. Ordinary citizens who have never seen a Star Destroyer up close still know the outline of his visor from posters pinned in the minds of children who like to draw danger with crayons. He exists where legend is most efficient, at the intersection of iconography and utility. It is possible to chart his legacy in two galaxies at once. Inside the saga's world, he is the answer to certain problems and the cause of others. He makes lawless space slightly more predictable, which is not the same thing as better. He offers a handshake to communities that offer respect and a closed fist to those who offer only fear. He leaves behind quiet towns and smoking fields in equal measure, depending on who called him in. Outside the saga, in the lights of theaters and the blue glow of living rooms, he is a triumph of design and restraint. A few minutes on screen taught decades of imagination how to dress a legend. Fans built cathedrals of story around him, and the creators of canon and legend alike walked those aisles, listening to the hymns. If you listen closely, you can hear the chord that ties the child in rain to the man on a throne. It is duty, but not the kind that sits easily on a banner. It is duty as self-definition. He refuses to be cloned into anonymity. He refuses to be digested into absence. He refuses to be remembered as an accident of another man's plan. That refusal becomes his prayer. It becomes the hum inside his helmet that no one else can hear. It becomes the steady pressure he brings to bear on anyone who tries to write his story for him. The myth of Boba Fett does not resolve into sainthood or damnation. It resolves into competence married to code, damage married to dignity, survival married to a sort of generosity that surprises precisely because it was never advertised. He is not the best shot in every room, though he is among them. He is not the fastest draw in every town, though he is close. What he is, consistently, is prepared. And preparedness, when combined with an aura that turns rumor into escort, becomes almost supernatural in effect. people decide not to test him. When they do, they often lose in ways that teach observers more than they teach the loser. So the mask walks on. Sometimes it is a warning, sometimes a promise, sometimes a mirror that shows a frightened man what he is about to become. The hunter, who became a ruler and did not stop being a hunter, understands that the galaxy is not an equation you solve once. It is a storm you navigate forever, trimming sail, listening for breaks in the wind, pacing yourself for the long swell. He will not be done a year from now, or a decade from now. Legends do not retire. They expand or they fracture. He has chosen expansion, at least for now, building something out of the same instinct that once taught him how to dismantle a target's life from across a city. In the end, the visor looks outward and we look inward, because that is what great masks do. They give us back our secrets in a shape we can admire. The boy who once carried his father's helmet like a relic grew into a man who could wear his own with authority. The galaxy responds to that kind of arc with reluctant respect. It makes room for him at tables, where power breaks bread. It gossips about his failures and studies his methods. And somewhere, on some small world where a child stares up at night and counts dangerous stars, a silhouette in a book or a screen teaches a lesson that history teaches again and again. You can be shaped by pain and still refuse to be defined by it. You can be named by others and still answer to yourself. The rain on Camino has not stopped. It never will. Storms have their own traditions. But the boy who learned to walk those platforms without slipping, who learned to listen to thunder as if it were a teacher, took that training into a galaxy that sometimes forgets to be kind. He made it remember. Not with speeches, not with manifestos, but with the steady pressure of a professional who knows how to finish what he starts. That is the legend. That is the mask. That is the man. And in the heavy quiet that follows his passing through a room, even the loudest boast learns to lower its voice. If you ever find yourself in a place where rumor hangs from the ceiling like smoke, where nervous laughter tries to bargain with fate, and the door opens to admit a figure whose armor tells more truth than he is willing to say, remember the oldest lesson. Myth is not fantasy. Myth is memory that learned how to walk. Boba Fett walks, and the galaxy adjusts its posture when he enters. Criminals remember taxes they have not paid. Warlords remember debts they have not settled. Even lords of the dark remember that there are kinds of loyalty money cannot buy and kinds of silence fear cannot command. He is not a hero, not cleanly. He is not a villain, not simply. He is a consequence, and consequences are the oldest law in any starfield. So the story continues, not as a straight line, but as a tightening spiral around a life that refuses to vanish. From clone son to hunter, from trophy to survivor, from enforcer to ruler, from mask to man and back again. His path carves warnings and invitations into the sand. Some will follow the warnings and live longer. Some will accept the invitations and meet him on terraces where the wind tastes of salt and dust. All will remember him, because forgetting him is a luxury only fools can afford. And Boba Fett does not work for fools. You may now look away from the visor. You may pretend that the shadow has moved on. But in some quiet corner of the mind where fear and admiration negotiate a truce, the myth waits. It will arrive exactly when it is needed, and never a heartbeat earlier. It will say nothing, it will stand still, and entire rooms will discover that stillness can be the loudest thing in the world.